good evening to the MAT students of MGSE and to Lauda, who is joining us from Sydney. Good morning to our invited discussion panel guests from Ireland, and I think Peter from Sweden is not here yet. The university acknowledges the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander traditional custodians of the land on which we work and learn. We pay respect to their elders, past and present, and the place of Indigenous knowledge in the academy. My name is Tiong, Seah, the professor in Maths Education at MGSE. Welcome to this Maths Education webinar that is being hosted by MAT students for MAT students for the second year running. Through these webinars, I hope that our MAT students will benefit from the opportunities to hear from and to interact with researcher academics from overseas as a means of understanding how mathematics and mathematics education are different and similar in different social cultural settings. So Lauda, Brandon, and Peter, if he's here, thank you for accepting our invite to share your insider knowledge and experience with us. It is 8:25 a.m. in Dublin and 9:15 a.m. in Gothenburg now. So I'm thankful for your being able to join us first thing in this brand new week. So I will now hand over the proceedings into the capable hands of our student hosts for this session today, Eliza, CRELLIN, and Eliza, SHIMANO.
Thanks, Wee. So yes, welcome to tonight's webinar. As we said, myself and Lisa SHIMANO will be your hosts for this session. The webinar that we're taking part in tonight is part 2 of a series called How Does Europe Do It? And as Wee's mentioned, it's hosted by Masters of Education students for Masters of Education students with invited panellists who represent maths education systems in Europe, looking specifically at systems where students have done well in tests like TIMSS and PISA. Part 1 was last year, where the panellists represented Italy, Poland and Turkey. And this year we're lucky enough to have representatives speaking to us in the context of Finland, Ireland and Sweden. So how this session will work, each of our panellists will speak for roughly about 10 to 15 minutes, sharing a bit of their knowledge and experience about how their maths education systems or even the culture in that particular country might have promoted student learning and performance in maths, and looking at TIMSS and PISA as possible indicators of that success. So it'll be really interesting to hear about how those different maths education systems operate and the impact that that has had on student performance. And as we said, looking at what's different and what's similar to the Australian context or other contexts that we may be part of. During each of the presentations, you are encouraged to pop any questions that you have into the chat box. Please do that as we go along, because that will make it easier for us to know who questions are directed to, and it will mean we can jump straight into the question section at the end. We will ask the panellists all of these questions at the end of all 3 presentations. So as I said, just as we go along, if a question pops into your mind, put it into the chat box. It'd be great if you could specify who the question is for. If it's for one particular panellist, or if it's something you'd like to hear from all 3 panellists about, please specify that. That will make it easier and smoother for our chat section as well. And there will be, time depending, a chance at the end to ask any extra questions if anything else comes up, but we'll start with those questions typed into the chat box. So quickly to introduce our 3 panellists, I'll introduce each one in a little bit more detail before they're about to speak. But tonight we'll be hearing from Dr. Laura TUOHILAMPI.
Perfect, Eliza.
Thank you. So Laura's coming to us from the University of New South Wales School of Education via Finland. Then we will hear from Dr. Brendan O'Sullivan, who is from Davis College, Mallow, part of the Dublin City University in Ireland. We'll be hearing from him. And lastly, we'll be hearing from Professor Peter NYSTROM from Sweden, and he is currently the director of the Swedish National Centre for Mathematics Education. Just a reminder before we officially get started that the session is being recorded so that it can be held on to for a later date. And so without any further ado, let me introduce officially our first panellist for this evening. And I'm going to say it again, Dr. Laura TUOHILAMPI from Finland. Dr. TUOHILAMPI is a maths education researcher at the University of New South Wales School of Education and practices as an in-service teacher trainer and is also the founder of Math Hunger. She is a multi-award winning mathematics educator, author and researcher, giving talks and workshops globally on how to inspire mathematical learning and avoid the negative connotations around maths. Before arriving in Australia, Laura had spent her life in Finland teaching mathematics and researching mathematics education. So I'll hand over to you, Dr. Laura.
Thank you, Eliza. Thank you, Professor Tiong, Seah, and everybody who is listening. This is a really big pleasure for me to be here. Wait a moment. I need to find a way to change my slide. So I'm going to talk to you about Finland's the education miracle. My name is Laura TUOHILAMPI, and like I said, I'm a research fellow in UNSW and the founder of Math Hunger and Maths for Humans. I do have this sort of double identity at the moment because I've been here in Sydney for 2 years now, and I'm starting to see a little bit like having a bit of an insider view of this education system here. But of course, because of my background, I am like very much inside the Finland education system, Finnish education system as well. And I really enjoyed Eliza stating, or maybe like expressing it like that us speakers are going to talk about the factors that might have had an influence in the PISA or TIMSS success or the general success in mathematics education, because we don't really know. But let's see what I have for you in this presentation. I will quickly give a brief introduction to the Finnish system. So I have collected a few things that I can talk about. Then I will draw your attention to some of the Australian-Finnish differences that I have been able to identify. And I will also give you a maths activity to sort of like give an example of what sort of similarities we still need to address in both education systems. So the secret ingredients, question mark. I'm not like definitely not saying that these would be like maybe like scientifically proven factors that have contributed the success of Finnish system, and also we are like concerned about the little drop that we've experienced in the last couple of years in those like large-scale studies in Finland. But these are certainly some things that we do have in Finland that are probably a little bit different from other countries and other education systems, and also the system that you have here in Australia, or we have here in Australia. Well, first of all, the teaching profession is highly valued. So we do have like a massive competition to become a student, like teacher student in Finland, especially primary school teachers. It's almost as competitive to get into that program than to become a doctor, like to apply for a medical school. So that being said, it doesn't have like sometimes I see sort of like myths stating that teachers are paid as like super highly valued professionals or something, that they make like lots of money. That's not true, but it is really like highly valued profession. So that sort of like gives the sense of purpose for our teachers. And then the whole system is really a lot of freedom. So we don't really have that much of regulation that I've noticed that many other countries do have. So it's a lot of like independency given to teachers, and maybe sometimes too much, but that's definitely a factor in Finland, that like the curriculum is really open, and like in the mathematics curriculum that I've seen here in Australia, both in Victoria and here in New South Wales, it's pretty precise, and it is like explicitly stated that this is the thing, this is the actual content that you need to teach. But the Finnish curriculum is way less detailed. It's more about like those like the general ethos, and these are the understandings that we need to address. Then in general, we have lots of resources, breaks, the days are pretty short, and also the kids start going to school only at the age of 7. We do have like early education also, but in general, everything is like sort of like short, and not lots of homework, not much of assignments. Everything is pretty loose and free. We don't have national testing at all. So no one's going to say to us that this is what you need to teach for. So it's more about like we are teaching or we are learning together, and that at least that's the ethos and that's the spirit that we are trying to have there, that we are learning for our lives and for ourselves and not for the testing. And the system is free, so everyone gets free comprehensive school, free secondary education, free university degrees if they so want. Also, the childcare, like kindergartens are free, and early childhood education is all is free. And we don't really have this private school system. We have maybe just like a handful of private schools, but you wouldn't even be able to tell which one they are. So basically all schools, but the differences between the schools are really minor. And also teachers are basically in general trusted by parents, so it doesn't happen too much that teachers would need to justify their methods or goals or anything to the parents. It's enough that we communicate and have relationship with the parents. So those are the things that I at least know that we kind of have in Finland that might look a little bit different in other education systems and countries. Now, the biggest difference is that I have noticed so far, and maybe that's just that I have been interested in these differences. There might be other ones that I haven't yet noticed, but to the how to say that, to the detriment of Australia, so, or like what in my opinion works better in the Finnish system is that here in Australia, while learning intentions have a basically like the idea of always stating the learning intentions really clearly and explicitly, and that has been proven to be really beneficial for the learning process. But I coming from Finnish perspective, I found that almost like determines the or like takes control over the learning process sometimes. And just today when I started my mathematics course here in UNSW, we discussed is that in the new NSW curriculum, it is stated that it shouldn't be used as, that's also stated in the NISA documents, that it shouldn't be used as a checklist. So basically, like when we sort of like rely on those learning intentions a lot, that might happen to the detriment of the actual learning and maybe like some sort of like spontaneity and give less time for freedom and free open discussions, because everything has to sort of like meet those learning intentions that have been stated in the beginning. So that's something that we rely a little bit less in Finland, and in my opinion, that's maybe a good thing. Or maybe there should be a balance in like having them stated clearly, but not letting them take control over the learning process. And then what I really appreciate here in the Australian system is the professional development. Like that is structured really well. In my opinion, it's really clear, and it's like expected for the teachers that they do engage in professional development programs, and there is like somebody that is regulating it. Whereas in Finland, it's almost like a wild west, and it's almost dependent on the teachers. So some teachers are really passionate and really ambitious, and they really want to develop as professionals, and to some extent, I can even see that what happens in Finland, that some teachers might think that if I don't have it, then I'm not going to be able to develop. So it's almost like as a mathematics teacher, especially if you are a primary school teacher teaching mathematics, you might even have adopted the fixed mindset as a teacher, like what's there for me to develop, like this is how I am as a teacher, and like some just have it and some don't. So that's something that in my opinion is like better here in Australia. Now in both countries, they're really like, this is the similarity. So in both countries, basically globally still, there is a need to make mathematics more relevant and connected. So that's why I have been so proactive with my my sort of like personal mission and passion to create mathematics resources and programs and ideas. And I do that like through these channels, Math Hunger and Maths for Humans. And I'm just going to give you one example of a mathematics task or mathematics activity that is thought in a different way, or maybe like created to show more real life relevances and connections. And that's something that I've shared through Match for Humans. Just checking the time. I still have time, so I'm going to give you, I'm maybe just going to keep my mouth shut for a minute or so and let you really see what's in there. This happened to me when I was doing my running program, and I needed to do 4 minutes run plus 1 minute walk 3 times, and on the other hand, after that 3 minutes run plus 1 minute walk for 4 times. And I was thinking, like, but do they take as long? Like, are they like equally long periods of like sequences? And because 4 times 3 is 3 times 4, so does that apply in this situation as well? And I'm just gonna let you think of this for a little moment. And I'm happy to hear about maybe somebody used the chat, or at least I know that you were thinking about this and thinking of like, how is the situation really? That kept my mind busy while I was running. Like, is it really so? Like, are they equally long? And of course it's not, because in this case, we are actually using the commutative and distributive properties of and multiplication. It's like basically like those principles that we teach in secondary mathematics, but rarely do we see how they are actually applied in real life situations, like in your running program. So these are the things that we develop and we produce in like through my how to say, like not companies, but the organizations that I've created. And let me go back for a second, and I'm going to invite you to join our mission as well. But to sort of like wrap this up, I did feel when I first started giving courses and lectures here in this Australian setting that that's because I was sort of like requested to give those really explicit learning intentions every time, and be really clear about like, what am I going to talk about here. And coming from the Finnish system, where it's like says way more open and maybe more spontaneous, and it may be more sort of like created together. So like my experience from the teaching in Finnish system was more like, hey, I'm having like a surprise for you, and let's see where this goes, and not being like super explicit about it. So when I first started here, I felt that I'm almost like needing to give a spoiler alert, like when I'm telling like the first thing when I start what I'm going to do, like where's the surprise then? But then I realized that it's not a problem, because I only need to give my audience what is it that we are going to go through, and what can they expect. Like I told you that I'm going to give you a math activity, but I don't need to tell how is that going to look like. So this is something that I've noticed and learned from my experiences in both these countries, and also being introduced to that large-scale data that is showing how mathematics education is going globally, that our students, they do need some surprises. They do need to have some sort of like appeal for their feelings as well. And that's a good way of engaging students, that we sort of like give some, allow some spontaneity in our activities. Sorry, Brenda, I couldn't hear you. Oh. Okay, I'll just keep going. But we can still be really explicit in how we, what we are going to do, and leave the surprise in the how we are going to do it. I invite you all to become Maths for Humans teacher by coming to see our page that is free and sharing free resources for teachers in all stages. And I'm going to thank you and give the floor for the next presenter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Laura, for your presentation. I think during your presentation, I've realised what I want to be when I grow up, and I think it's you. So thank you so much for sharing that with us today. A reminder that if you have any questions specifically for Dr. Laura based on what she has presented, now is a good time to start popping those in the chat. Of course, we'll go through questions at the very end, but the sooner you put in a question and let Dr. Laura know it's specifically for her, that will give her the time to read and prepare what she's going to say. So if something's on your mind, pop it into the chat now as we move on to our next panellist. Next, we have Dr. Brendan O'Sullivan. And Dr. Brendan has been a post-primary teacher for over 20 years and is currently teaching mathematics at Davis College, Mallow, in Cork. He holds a master's degree in education and mathematics and completed his PhD in 2017. All of his postgraduate qualifications were attained while continuing to teach full-time, which is pretty impressive. You can find him on Twitter, and he is apparently noted for sharing some good infographics. So I might pop his Twitter handle into the chat because that could be a good thing for you to jump onto. I'll do that in a moment. He served as secretary and subsequently chairperson of the Irish Mathematical Teachers Association from 2011 to 2019 and acts as a subject advisor to the Irish Teaching Council. So thank you. I'm going to hand over to Dr. Brendan to let us know a bit about what's going on in Ireland in maths education.
Yes. Good morning from Ireland, and it's good evening for the rest of you as well. So I'm just trying to check here now that I can share my screen. So, and without losing the important stuff. Can you all see that okay? We'll assume if you don't object anyway, we'll assume that you do anyway. Now, one thing I have to warn you about there is that there could be little messages coming in over the intercom, so don't worry too much about those. They're for me really, not for you to worry about as well. And I'll make sure to mute so I don't interrupt the next speaker as well. Okay, so what I want to do with you really is to kind of talk about, I suppose, Ireland's story. And over the last 15 years, we've kind of gone through a lot of curriculum change. And I suppose it started around 2005, and it was kind of the most large-scale change we ever had in the country. Before that, we would have had a change in the 80s, but it would have been very, very minor in comparison to this. So what I'm going to do with you is I'm just going to talk about a little bit about the Irish education system so you kind of understand the terms that I use. Then project maths would have been the term that we use for our curriculum change. So it kind of sounds like a bit of an experiment, but I mean, I suppose it was painful in the beginning, but it worked out okay in the end for us anyway like that. But hopefully that'll give some insight into how we've done with PISA. I suppose why did project maths come about? Why was the curriculum change? Then I suppose what were the goals of it? Then I'm going to share with you then I suppose like little tasks, bits and pieces that we've done in Ireland. What were the actual changes on the ground for us as teachers and professionals then? And then I'll stop talking and give you a break from listening to me. Okay, so just looking at us here. I'm coming from post-primary, so I'm talking about post-primary. So we would have a junior cycle and a senior cycle. So for the junior cycle, they'd start off at 13 years of age, and that would go from 13 to 15 years old. So for the junior cycle, you'd have 3 years. For senior cycle, then it's optional between 2 and 3. So there would be what we call a gap year, which we'd know as TY, which would be transition year, where they kind of move away from academic things and they do kind of, we'll say, going out into the community, engaging in kind of team bonding skills, kind of developing non-academic parts of things. And it's also a year for them to mature. The last 2 years then, which they can go straight to if they wish, would be the senior cycle. And what they would do then would be they would do what we would call the Leaving Cert. And the Leaving Cert then would be a high stakes exam for us in Ireland. It would be kind of the gateway towards getting into university, third level stuff doing after school. So I suppose this year, it's no harm to mention that you know, we had accredited grades whereby the teacher assigned the grades accompanied by the traditional exams. Because of the lockdowns, the traditional exams would have been changed. They would have involved more choice than we would have had before. because normally there's no choice in maths exams. So it was a big novelty this year, not only to have, I suppose, the credit grades and the ordinary exams beside each other, but also the fact that they had choice in their maths exams for the first time in, I think, 20 years. So when I talk about Leaving Certificate, that's the exam that they do at the end of their formal post-primary education. Junior cycle then has changed a little bit as well. So maths would be compulsory junior cycle, they would all do it. It's not compulsory at senior cycle, but we really are talking about 99.9%. It would be perceived that, you know, you wouldn't really go far in the workplace or in any kind of third level course unless you would kind of have maths done as a subject for your Leaving Cert. Often, even to get into apprenticeships, you'd still have to have your maths for junior cycle. It wouldn't necessarily be needed for Leaving Cert, but if you are in school, I certainly can't think of any example in the last 10 years where I've had a student that hasn't taken maths towards their Leaving Cert. So I'm showing you here the data from 2019 because I suppose it's different. The exams were effectively cancelled in 2020. We just had predicted grades that in that year. And this year again, then it wouldn't be, I suppose, as reliable either, in that with the accredited grades, then it kind of skews the data. So, because some kids wouldn't have taken levels they normally would have in the last 2 years. So I suppose the real picture would be that at the moment, 2019, which is the most reliable data that we have recently, 33% of our students would do higher level, which would be, I suppose, those that would aspire to be not necessarily mathematicians, but would have a high maths content later on in life. Ordinary then would be for those who just want to get by, and then we'll say foundation level then for those who kind of have serious difficulties with maths or would struggle with it. During the curricular reform there, they tried to get rid of the foundation level, but they couldn't. They found that it just would be too much of a heave to get rid of it. So before the reform as well like that, then a higher level would have been about 25%. Ordinary level would have been about 65%, and foundation level would have been about 15%. So there has been changes visible there from the, you know, I suppose the changes that they brought in. I suppose the heat or the pressure that came for change really started around 2006 onwards, and that led to this curriculum overhaul, which is known as Project Maths then. So I suppose just looking there at the concerns that were raised around that time, and some of these have to do with PISA as well. So again, the fact that we weren't doing well with problem solving, and a lot of these things here that I'm quoting there, FOS would be kind of an economic think group for the government. The GGFSN would be looking at, I suppose, the skills of our citizens and see if they're prepared for the future. Sheila et al. Then would be with our Education Resource Centre here in Ireland, and they'd be kind of very much concerned with how we're doing with TIMSS and PISA. There was a high failure rate that kept kind of creeping up. It was kind of 10% across all levels, and it got as high as 12% there in ordinary levels. So there was kind of real alarm bells going about how, well, our kids are coming out of school and their maths isn't very, very good. There was a complaint as well that we've got comparatively few very high achievers. That's still the case. It's commented on in PISA 2018 that we don't have a lot of high achievers. We have, I suppose, brought up the low achievers, but we're still trying to, I suppose, foster and encourage our high achievers there to do well. Ireland was 17th out of 34 for reading literacy. That's gone up now to about 5th. We were 26th out of 34 in the OECD countries for math literacy. I think PISA 2018, it was 21. Some say we're 20 with Germany, but I'd say realistically we're about 21st. And, you know, like I suppose in terms of how we've done, we've kind of got it up a little bit, and we've kind of held our own then from that. But we haven't done meteoric rises either like that. Then, you know, we've kind of held our own in the past few years. So I suppose our culture then, so when I was a young teacher starting off like that, then, you know, it was very much about, you know, passing exams. And there was complaint then that we weren't really showing them the intricacies of the subject or encouraging them to go further with it. We weren't really looking at concepts or, you know, helping them to understand the subject and what was important in it. Like they would do problems. They would do problems that would look quite difficult on the surface, But the thing with those was that they were used to them. They were quite familiar to them. So they were well rehearsed with them as well. So, you know, again, the students wouldn't really have had a chance to, I suppose, got the depth that they needed with the subject either. And again, you know, examiners would call for, you know, changes to be brought about. Another thing as well then is that our subject was quite abstract. There wasn't any real tie-in to, you know, I suppose real life applications then and looking at it in terms of a subject like that then. So this curriculum change then, it was really kind of focused on, you know, bringing about a positive change. Kind of looking at all the different problems that I've outlined and kind of, I suppose, improving those. A big thing as well then would be kind of moving away from, you know, knowing how, not just the skill or the algorithm, but also understanding why you do something in the maths and trying to, I suppose, appreciate better what's involved with it as well. So, you know, the changes that came, we have 5 strands now. What they did was they took out matrices and vectors. They shrunk calculus down a bit, and then they increased statistics and probability from what it would have been before. Algebra, number, trigonometry, and geometry would be largely the same as it was. There was a little bit of change in geometry in terms of notation and things like that. Again, they encouraged making connections that weren't made before, different types of teaching styles. And again, you know, we had to bring out, I suppose, new tasks and change our exams and change our textbooks as well then. So on the ground then, I want to show you, I suppose, the kind of changes that we had. So in terms of methodologies, I suppose this is how I would have been taught long division, which would have been, I suppose, very much an algorithm in nature. So it'd be kind of divide the first term on the inside by the first term on the outside, then, you know, change the sign, then add up and then start again. Whereas now we've moved more towards an intuitive way. So the kids call this the box method. It would be known, I suppose, internationally as an array method or a functions approach. Again, I suppose trying to get them to understand what they're doing, not just learn off a series of steps, but actually examine the thing that's in front of them then and take the appropriate approach to it then. Lesson study has been promoted. It kind of came to an end there with the lockdown, but this would be kind of like, I suppose, instead of kind of showing you specific lesson study, this would be kind of like what teachers would do. So a group of 3 or 4 teachers in a school or across schools would work together and take a topic and kind of look at how to teach it really, really well. So over maybe an 8 or 9 week period, they would look at how to teach a lesson and then share the ideas and stuff like that. Real life applications. So again, I suppose, like our tasks in school now, very much looking at things that you would encounter in real life. So looking at, I suppose, different formulas, things then that, you know, you would encounter in the real world, trying to make the maths real for them. So I suppose when I started off teaching, they would have been saying, well, what use is this to me in real life? Whereas that kind of complaint doesn't come now from the 13 and 14-year-olds like it used to before. I suppose making connections. I never knew about Rise and Run until I started teaching this new course. We used to just teach these kind of compartmentalized, so there was no interaction between coordinate geometry and trigonometry and, you know, like trigonometry as well. So, you know, here now would always try and link together different parts of the course. So bring in, we'll say tan theta there, opposite over adjacent, looking at, you know, the differential of a line then in terms of its slope as well. There are things that we used to teach kind of very, very separately that now we're bringing together again. This is, I suppose, the kind of leading cert that I would have done. So again, very, very abstract there. You know, there isn't a very lot to it. I mean, we'll say the first 2 parts there would have been quite familiar to the student like that. And now our exams have gotten, I suppose, much more involved. You can see here now you've got a kind of reference to a historical scenario. The exams used to be 6 pages long. Now they're more typically 24, 25 pages long. So again, you know, again, kind of, I suppose, trying to get them to look at different applications, look at different contexts with the maths then that they would have studied. A big thing then, I suppose, that we're kind of hitting now at the moment would be at junior cycle. We're doing classroom-based assessments, which we wouldn't have done in Ireland before. There's 2 types of classroom-based assessment. One's a mathematical investigation, one is a stats investigation. Again, it's viewed as a part of the teaching and learning, not just assessment. Again, you're kind of getting the kids to research something, kind of, you know, do some authentic learning over a 3-week period, and then that gets a comment then on how they're done. It's not given an actual percentage, it's kind of given a comment on how they've done in terms of their effort. So in my school, these would be, I suppose, different classroom assessments that we would have done. You can just have a look at them there. And you find out an awful lot as a teacher as well, working with these and correcting these. You find out all kinds of interesting things, you know, in terms of what they're interested in, but also, you know, if you want to drive to Moscow in the morning, how's the best way to do it. Again, how I would do it, I'd work with them on Google Classroom Widget so I can kind of update it very, very quickly. You know, I take it from textbook tasks like that then. Mixture of open and closed tasks, very much important that it brings in stuff to do with history of maths, like that things they can apply to. And then I kind of corrected in terms of 2 things that were interesting, you know, and 1 thing that could be made better. Again, you get kids looking at material they normally wouldn't, and you also get discussion coming out of it as well. This would be a typical investigation that I would give. The age group here would be 13 years old. We wouldn't have a history of giving them investigations like that. So we'll say the book is giving me the bottom bit, I'm adding the top bit in for them there. And then, you know, they come up with lovely things. Like, I'd never seen this before. So, you know, 1 has got 1 angle in it, 2 has got 2 angles in it, 3 has got 3 angles in it. So the kids actually went and you know, found this and explained it to class like that then. So I thought it was something really, really nice and authentic as well, kind of opened up new experiences to us. So we've made a lot of changes. Teaching and learning has changed an awful lot. We've got new types of assessment as well. It's still not there yet. It's still a work in progress. It's probably not as good as they would tell you officially, but more research needs to be done on that. But we've certainly made some strides towards improving things. So I'll stop there. I'm not sure how I'm doing on time, but thank you very much for this.
Thank you so much, Dr. O'Sullivan. That was really fascinating. I think what was particularly interesting was to get that story of a country who had identified an issue in their maths education system and hearing about that journey you went on. And I was just making note after note of things that you said are similar to what we discuss in our course and what we discuss. So that was really fascinating, that idea of focusing on the conceptual learning rather than just what you're doing, but why and how. And that it was great to hear about how you're integrating curriculum a little bit more. That's something we've really been talking about, looking at curriculum documents as well, is not just teaching all the concepts separately, starting to integrate them. And yeah, really fascinating. So thank you so much for sharing. It was really great to hear. Now, just a reminder, guys, to keep, well, I say keep, but there's no questions in the chat yet, to pop some questions in the chat as we go. If you've got any questions for Dr. Laura or Dr. Brendan now, like I said, it gives them time to read and prepare as we head into our final speaker for tonight, and that is Professor Peter NYSTROM. Now, introducing Professor Peter is a bit making me reminisce a little bit, because this exact day 2 years ago, I was in Gothenburg in Sweden. So not there today, but maybe hearing a talk about how maths is going in Sweden will be the next best thing. So Professor Peter NYSTROM is the director of the Swedish National Centre for Mathematics Education, and is also a senior lecturer at one of the teacher education departments at Gothenburg University in Sweden. He's been working in maths education for a long time and has been involved in development and research related to international comparative studies, particularly TIMSS. Currently, he's involved in several development projects and in-service professional development efforts together with mathematics teachers. So I'm going to hand over now to Professor Peter. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here with you today. And I will say a few words about the Swedish system and some of the things that we've done in the later years to try to perhaps change things, etc. So I have a presentation to share with you here. Just briefly about the Swedish school system, it's not very complicated, and to some extent it really looks very much like the Finnish system in many ways, at least. We have 9 years of compulsory school, and before that we have a preschool class year, which is basically compulsory too. So in a way we have 10 years of compulsory schooling, you might say. Then we have an upper secondary school system with basically 2 directions. We have a theoretical programs, and we have vocational programs. And most 16-year-olds, they go into upper secondary education. It's sort of more or less expected. It's not compulsory, but it's more or less expected. So most people go there. It's also interesting to hear about the Finnish case, and Finland is interesting. I mean, it's our neighboring country, so they're very close to us in that sense, and there are some similarities, but there are also some differences. And Finland has always been performing very well in PISA and TIMSS and other studies. So it's been interesting and something very much discussed in Sweden. What is Finland doing that we are not doing? And I think there was some of the things that Laura was talking about, which is interesting. For instance, the teacher profession is valued in Finland. It's not as valued in Sweden. So this is a big difference. We don't get that many applications to teacher education that they do in Finland. So this is a major difference between the Swedish and Finnish system, I would say. We have quite a lot of national testing in Sweden and national assessment programs, which they don't. There are also some differences when it comes to the private schools and the way schools are organized. So there are differences and similarities which are very interesting, I think. It's kind of strange for me really to sit here and try to say something about what we do well in a way in mathematics education in Sweden, because we don't tend to talk about ourselves in that way. We tend to talk about it as a problem that we don't do very well. And we've seen this decline actually from 1995 when the first TIMSS study was, which is the all-time high for Swedish math education, as far as we can see. And then from there on, based on both TIMSS and PISA, we can see a decline for a number of years. But there seems to have happened something, at least based on PISA results. And I would say that TIMSS show something similar from 2012. So we've recovered to some extent since then. So we tend to talk a lot about, and we have been talking a lot about, what are we doing wrong? What's the problem? I will soon get to things that we've done right, I think, too. But we have to start there because it's sort of the way we talk about things. I think this picture is interesting because it shows that we have sort of recovered and we're on the right track to some extent, at least if we look at PISA results. But we can also see that these three subject areas seem to follow each other, which is interesting, and it causes some things to think about. Why is that the case? And it might signal that there are some structural things that happen which has not to do with specifically what we're doing in math education, but perhaps other things that affect us. So this is something to think about, of course. And again, to start with, explanation for this decline that we've seen and discussed so much. We had a big curriculum reform in 1995, and to some extent it was already then influenced by some of the things that Brendan was talking about in math education. Focus on more on competencies, for instance, and trying to look at other things. But this was not. It was not very much implemented, actually. And I've been working with national tests in Sweden for many years, and we try to do things like this, try to influence teachers to do this. What should it look like in the classroom? I find it very hard, and this is something very interesting, I think, a very interesting issue. How do we make this really happen in classrooms then? I think we've had some challenges with that in my country. But the implementation of this curriculum reform was very little of implementation work actually on the national level. We've seen lots of decentralization, privatization, and competition between schools in Sweden. Somebody said that the Swedish school system is one of the most the most privatized, or what do we say? I don't know what word to use. Marketized. I don't know how to. It's sort of a market for anyone to start schools, and this is has been raised as a problem because the idea is that this is supposed to raise quality. We don't really see that happening. We have a lack of licensed teachers. This is a continuous problem, actually. Yes, I was already talking about this poor implementation of reform ideas, I think, through these years since 1995. We sort of introduced a much more complex curriculum by then, but to really make that happen in schools might even have negative effects. We have a low school variance, like Finland and most Nordic countries, actually. Low differences between schools, but it's growing. So this is a concern, and this has been raised very clearly based on international studies like PISA. This is a concern. But I would like to say two things that we've done, and I think that they are really interesting efforts to improve mathematics teaching, and I would like to say a few words about them. The first one, which is interesting, is that we have over the, let's say, the last 10 years, it might be 8 or something, I don't know exactly, but we've had an increase in teaching hours for mathematics in compulsory school. So for the students starting now in this semester in compulsory school, they will have 1,230 hours of mathematics, and if you go back 10 years, they had 900. So this is a 37% increase in the hours of mathematics in compulsory school. So we expect a 37% increase in PISA results as well, which has not happened, of course. Sorry. Naturally not. But still, it's a question, how much increase could we expect from a big increase in the number of lessons of mathematics? How much does time matter doing mathematics, and how is that connected to the quality of the mathematics teaching going on, mathematics learning going on? I think this is a very interesting issue, and of course we would expect rather improvements just based on this. The other thing that I think has and might play a big role in the future, at least, is we had a really big professional development project in 2012 to 2016. The English translation of it is The Boost for Mathematics. And in this program, which was a one-year program for every teacher, mathematics teachers in the country, we actually managed to reach approximately 75% of all mathematics teachers, compulsory school and upper secondary school. 1 year PD program. It costs around, I have to translate it to some other currency. I chose US dollars because that might be more international. I should have used some Australian money, of course, but sorry about this. Approximately 60 million US dollar, which is this is really huge for a country of our size. In this project, we, together with my university and my center, together with other universities, developed lots of what we call modules, and each module was covering 1 semester of work for teachers, reading and doing things in the classroom. I will show you just a short picture of that as well. And during this time, they were supposed to have small group meetings with other teachers led by a tutor. And these tutors were educated, and also we had a program actually for school leaders to understand what we were trying to do. We reached quite a lot of school leaders as well to make them sort of support this in a clear way. There are lots to say about this project, but I will make it very short, of course, here. But what about effects? Well, short-term effects, well, some evaluations have shown some changes in the classroom. I think that there are some long-term changes, a way of thinking about mathematics. We've been able to introduce some mathematics, some educational aspects of mathematics which were not known in beforehand among lots of teachers. So I think it might have a strong effect. We haven't been able to show strong effect on the teacher performance, but it might have added to the positive direction of PISA results, perhaps. We don't know that yet. So basically, these are examples of modules. Then you can see there's a whole range of models, and teachers were supposed to choose 2 of these together with their colleagues and work with them, depending on what you were interested in, what you were doing. And the kind of model that this was based on was a 4-step model that teachers individually prepare themselves by reading something. They had a discussion in the small group with a math tutor based on a few questions that were raising important issues. Step C, where they were supposed to try something out in the classroom, do some activities, and then get back to the group again and reflect on their experiences with doing this. So this was the general kind of model for this big professional development project. Just finally, a few words. Oh, sorry, few words about. I was just thinking about trends. What's happening now, in a sense. I would say that there's some signs. We had a situation where there's been lots of focus, and this is not just math education. This is a society question. Focus on general issues about school and on evaluation of things. And we've been evaluating so much that we don't know. We haven't had time to do anything about it. That's sort of a problem whenever you get into that kind of system. But I think I can see some signs now of an increased interest from governmental authorities that look into what's happening actually in the classroom, which is promising, I think, to be able to perhaps continue an improvement here. What I've seen also, and I can hear it more and more, there's an increased demand for research base and scientific evidence of some kind from schools and from municipalities, etc. You hear this much more often now than 10 years ago. And this is a challenge for us working also in the university, because I think it's sometimes challenging to actually give this kind of base as well. We might not have the answers that are expected, and we have to think about how to answer these questions. I see that low performance in mathematics is still a widespread concern among many people working in schools, and I can see also some kind of, well, slowly at least, some demand for assistance growing. They're asked for help more and more now, I think. So just a few some trend spotting things at the end here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all the panelists for sharing all their information on their secret ingredients to each of their countries. It was very, very insightful. We've got a lot of great questions coming in. I might start off with the targeted questions to specific panelists. We've had quite a lot of questions for Dr. Laura, so I'd like to start with Dr. Laura. So the first question is, if teachers' PD is not monitored and it sounds like the system trusts them, how are they monitored within the system? Is it done largely by the schools themselves, or how does it work? I think you're on mute, Dr. Laura.
Yes, now I finally found you. I don't know if that happens to other people, but sometimes I lose the Zoom. Yeah. I can't find it anywhere, but now I found it. So like it seemed like many of you had the same question. So basically it's sort of like maybe like a concern or worry about like how do we then track everything. And so there was like the question about the how to track and monitor the teacher's development, but also like how to track the students' development without having those national tests. And well, I try to keep this short, but like in general, with the teacher professional development, I think it's a little more varying, because it really is a lot up to teachers and schools. There are some teachers that are really active and they might translate some of their practices or sort of like transfer some of their practices to their colleagues as well. But it is also something that happens a lot, that some teachers are not that interested, and we do have like a request for all teachers to participate in like a couple of days of teacher like professional development per year. But if the school is a bit like, if the school principal is a bit lazy, it might be something, it's not really regulated, like the quality of those things. So it could be something really casual, something that is not proven to be effective or not even scientific. So sometimes it really doesn't work that well. But then on the other hand, we do have lots of, it's a small community. We are only 5 million people in Finland. So there are lots of like Facebook groups and sort of like collaboration, and similar to that one that Peter describes, like big programs that almost everybody participates in. So maybe some of the teachers are a little bit reluctant and not really changing their practices, but at least like some part of the teachers get information and maybe change something. And should I go on, Eliza, with the sort of the general question about the
Yes, there was another question related. I think a lot of us want to know, because you said there's no testing done across schools in Finland, how do you collect data on mathematics learning or students' performances at schools nationally? And what other ways do teachers collect learning evidence for reporting?
Yeah, again, that's like, as a teacher, you are welcome to collect like whatever, like informal feedback and like do surveys and stuff like that. So there's no problem with that. We do have like anonymized national testing or examinations. So we do collect some sort of like generalizable data of how we are doing, like in general, and that can be connected to the schools as well, but it's not like a open data for everybody to see, and it definitely doesn't affect in the ways that I think that is going on here in Australia, that the schools are sort of like competing to be the best ones in those whatever, like tracking procedures. So it's more about like just making sure that we are on a right track, and maybe give like those participating schools some information that this is where you are standing, and if you want to do some improvements. But maybe I just want to like add to the general ethos of the maybe like the worry of giving up those exams and like tracking everything. And on the other hand, what Peter mentioned, that like you had you increase the number of mathematics lessons per like during the comprehensive years, and we also did that in Finland a couple of years ago. We added one course for the like the upper secondary school level, and there was like a long and huge discussion about like, should we make it like, should we add compulsory studies? And I remember I was a speaker in that event where there was like an animated discussion of that, and I gave my opinion saying that we can always do more, and we can test more, and we can track more, but if we don't change what doesn't work, it doesn't help. So we can always do more, but like if we are doing things that just don't help, it doesn't matter how much we do that or how more mandatory we make it. So like I just think that we can have national testing, or we can have like more mathematics, we can have it compulsory, and that might work really well if we just focus on the learning. But at the moment, like immediately when we turn the focus on not the learning process, but like what is going to be my data in the national exam, like what's my school progress going to look like, so then we are not focusing the right things anymore.
Nice. Thank you so much for your detailed response, Dr. Laura. I now have a question for Dr. Brendan. How does project math intersect with the general STEM momentum that most countries have been experiencing?
There would be, I suppose, increased interest with STEM. We would have a lot of, I suppose, Ireland would be noted for its low tax rate in terms of corporations, so we would attract a lot of multinationals. So there would be a lot of pharma companies kind of moving in. So I suppose in the last 10 years, we've got more kids doing chemistry, a little bit more doing physics. In Ireland, we're actually calling it STEAM, so they're bringing in art as well with it. So I suppose maths is kind of seen to be like if you want to go on and study sciences, or if you want to go on and do something technical, would say all those students will be doing a higher level maths. So what would have been noted there was with the introduction of the curriculum change, more kids would have attempted the higher level than they would have done before, but also say like engineers and kind of different professions as well have kind of reached out to try and get kids interested in STEM and STEAM careers. So the maths will be kind of seen as an important part of that recipe, you know, part of one of the ingredients that would be important for it as well. So I think the subject has kind of encountered kind of an increased popularity, and very much so for those who are hoping to, I suppose, pursue STEAM careers as well.
Okay, that was very interesting to know how Ireland was incorporating STEAM into the learning environment. There was another question for you, Dr. Brendan. How is the implementation of the changes in the Irish system monitored? What kind of impact on student achievement do you think the changes have had? Dr. Brendan, I think you're on mute.
I am. I'm so sorry. We have a deputy principal here who just loves to take the intercom and talk for about 5 minutes. So I was just waiting there because I feel that you've suffered enough listening to me. You don't need to hear another Irish accent this morning. So to get back to your question, you asked me there about it was how is it monitored? Okay, so how is the implementation monitored? I suppose we would have an inspector in Ireland. So they would have been like, you know, checking to see had we changed in terms of methodologies, had our planning changed as well. Also, we would have a chief examiner's report that would be published. So that would kind of comment on, you know, whether the kids seem to be embracing the new techniques. Have they, I suppose, displayed the correct mindset in terms of their examination performance and such like that. The media would be very involved as well in Ireland. They'd be very interested in how the kids would be doing, especially around the time of you know, university places and allocation places like that then. So you would get commentary on maths because like in Ireland, we kind of had a big decade of you know, teacher bashing, and maths is an awful subject, and you know, it'll sell newspapers for you if you can give out about the subject and give out about, you know, the way that it's taught. In terms of attainment, our failure rate would have gone down, yes. I suppose like our exams are very much standardized like that then, so they only kind of give out the same amount of A, B, C's and D's like that then. On the ground, you know, there would be evidence that kids would be more open to problem solving, that they would be, you know, kind of responding to real life applications. And again, I suppose the fact that they are more willing to take it at the higher level would be a sign that, you know, it has had a positive impact on the attainment, but there is room there for much more careful studies there to kind of give insight into it.
Thank you so much for your response. I'd like to ask Dr. Peter next. There's a question for you. What do PISA results really tell? Because Sweden is doing remarkably well in so many areas, business, health, happiness. What do you think the PISA results tell in terms of Sweden's mathematics achievement?
This is, of course, a very big question, and there are lots of things to say about the PISA results and what they tell us. And I was kind of referring to that when we see that these three curves that I was showing, they sort of follow each other. So there seems to be something else going on here, perhaps. And we know that, for instance, countries scoring high on reading, like Finland and to some extent Sweden as well, tend to perform very well in PISA. And there's sort of correlated things. And there are lots of things to discuss. And there's also a discussion in Sweden right now about excluding some parts of students and not, and whether that has affected the results, etc. So I completely agree. I suppose with with the question that we need to think about that. We must be very careful with the interpretation of results like PISA. When it comes to mathematics, anyway, I think it's a little bit more interesting when we can look at other evidence as well. For instance, TIMSS, which is also, I mean, you can criticize TIMSS, but anyway, doing a little bit differently. And we can see that when these are following each other, it sort of anyway strengthens some kind of result. We can believe it a little bit more strongly if they follow each other. And we've seen that in Sweden, they seem to follow each other. So and of course we need other evidence as well. But we need to consider this deeply and not make any quick answers or quick interpretation of PISA. That's my best answer in this short moment.
Yes, thank you. There's one more question for you, Dr. Peter. During the mathematics teaching hours, do the teachers integrate the mathematics discipline with other curriculums such as science or STEM, or is it only focused on mathematics?
I would say I don't think there's very much integration with other subjects in school. Not very much. There's some, of course, in upper secondary school, if you move there, because, of course, there are lots of connection between physics, advanced physics and mathematics. And so there are some connections there, but not very much. I think that the integration is more like into kind of everyday problems and others, but it's done from the mathematics point of view, I think. So I would, but one thing that is interesting in many countries today is the subject of coding or programming, which has been solved differently in different countries. In Sweden, this has been put as part of the math curriculum. So in that sense, there's some kind of crossover, because this has been given to the math teachers to actually implement. So, and then you have to think about what does that mean? How is mathematics, and this is what many teachers in Sweden are struggling with. How do we do coding with mathematics or for mathematics and not just coding and mathematics? How do we integrate that? This is a big issue today, as it is in many countries, I know.
Thank you so much. Now there's a question for all the panelists in general. How much is technology used in teaching and learning of mathematics in your country? Is that something teachers are trained in, especially now because of the global pandemic, I guess? So if anyone wants to.
I'll jump in first. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, Laura.
No worries, Brendan. Keep going. Keep going.
I'll let you in then. I suppose, yeah, our teachers would, as part of their, the teaching degree, they would kind of be made familiar with things like, it was Maple in my time, now it's moved on towards GeoGebra. So, there would be a lot of GeoGebra used now. So during, I suppose, the training that people were given in terms of our curriculum reform like that, then GeoGebra would have been very much promoted in terms of, let's say, looking at calculus and graphs and things like that, and maybe aspects of it as well. Again, a lot of investment took place, I suppose, in terms of bringing in technology as well like that. Then, in terms of research, before the pandemic, it would have been underutilized. Teachers, I suppose, would prefer maybe using, the whiteboard and the marker because it's more straightforward. Let's say a lot of people now would kind of use the visualizer as well. And then with, say, the programs like that, then, like if you've got somebody who's kind of a techie person like that, then they will kind of use it naturally like that then, but on the whole, I wouldn't say it's very much. I suppose Microsoft Teams and Google Classrooms kind of came in an awful lot. During lockdowns, we wouldn't have had any maths other than that. And then I suppose just ways then to kind of, I suppose, share work, monitor work, things like that would have developed. But I think people are very thankful to kind of get back to normality of the classroom as well like that then, which has meant less technology being used.
That's really insightful. Thank you. Dr. Laura, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, you can just add, we also have lots of programs in Finland, and I think that's almost like a global phenomenon that those like technology related connected programs are provided for teachers. But I just want to add like another aspect, like maybe this is happening more and more nowadays, but maybe a couple of years ago it was more often idea or like the way of seeing ICT and technology in education as something really separate, as something really sophisticated and like a new modern thing. So it was more about teachers maybe thinking, and even like when I was like invited to give some insights about it, so it was more about like, can you tell us like about like the best platforms or best softwares, or can we all be trained to use like, let's say GeoGebra, which is really great. But maybe nowadays we see it more holistically, that like even when we are having our computers, even if we are like displaying something with our like through our computers or whatever, it's already using technology. And I think that nowadays we are like also starting to realize, at least what we are doing in our projects is also that in social media there are lots of mathematical discussions that like organically and for free give us mathematics, like everyday connections with mathematics. So that's also the use of technology, that we use social media and those like social platforms that we have.
That's very fascinating. And Dr. Peter, if you have
I don't have very much to add. I think that the situation is quite similar, that there's a growing interest, and it has to some extent to do with equipment. I mean, most classrooms now have a projector, so they can do different things than they could just a few years ago. So there's been a huge development. So there are lots of things have happened, lots of apps and stuff that teachers now use. We still have the same problems with education. For instance, there's a growing interest in diagnostic instruments, in apps students doing. We still have the problem that what to do with the results. And I think that this is not changing anything. It makes it easier to score, but we still have the same problem. We need to raise these issues, I think. Another issue that I've met, we're working a quite big project now with primary school teachers, where we are trying to really focus on the working with concrete stuff, to start there, to separate numbers, this kind of teaching. And sometimes teachers want to, well, do we really need that? Can we not, instead of using these, can we not have a picture on the screen instead? Because they think it's the same thing. And we try to tell them, no, it's not. Stop, think. You don't move to symbols too quickly, or pictures of real things that kids can hold in their hands. So there are some really challenging things, not saying that you should stop using technology. I think it's very important, but to really educate people and try to think about what happens when we do it, how should we use it in a good way. So we have real big challenges, I think ahead in this direction.
Thank you. That was really interesting with the tool that you've shown. Yes, thank you so much, everyone. I think that's all with the questions. I think we're right on time. I'd like to pass it on to Eliza for concluding.
Thanks, Lisa. Thank you to everyone who participated tonight. Really great questions, and it was great that we were able to get through the questions as well, and hear not only our panelists give their prepared presentations, but put them on the spot a bit and ask them about some of those other topics that really added to what we were able to learn from you this evening. So thank you so much again to our three panelists. We will wrap it up there.